Gamers, happy Highguard week to all who celebrate. Have you been Highguarding? I've been Highguarding all over the place. They say if I keep Highguarding this much, I'm gonna go blind. I kid, but I put about a dozen hours into the game since it's launched, and yeah, it's still got a long ways to go, as I discussed in my impressions video, which went up a few days ago. I won't rehash all of that now, but I will say that Highguard is largely a victim of the spotlight put on it by Jeff Keighley, who was trying to be helpful and promote a game he legitimately enjoyed, but I think he put way too much gas on that promotion, and the result was some good old-fashioned overhype, the likes of which we haven't seen for quite some time now. This is of course the game that Keighley generously reserved as the end-of-show Game Awards reveal from late last year, talking it up as if it were a once-in-a-generation title, the culmination of former Titanfall and Apex Legends talent cooking for years in secret, only for it to be a, free-to-play hero shooter thing that kind of looked like, well, Apex Legends, but now with horses. Immediately, the internet was awash with criticism, many disappointed to see yet another hero shooter with bland character designs and an uninspired aesthetic attempting to break into this oversaturated genre. After that, and no doubt a little shell-shocked by the hostile response they got, developer Wildgate Entertainment went radio silent. In the weeks leading up to launch, we didn't see a single new trailer or a single post in the studio socials. Many wondered if the game was even going to release on its stated date, or if the studio was gearing up for a delay in response to all of the criticism. But eager fans were put at ease when 2 days prior to launch, Jeff Keighley reappeared, declaring his unwavering confidence in Highguard by posting this Jurassic Park gif, saying, quote, "In 48 hours, I'll be accepting your apologies," end quote. Jeff, you do know what happens at the end of Jurassic Park, right? Like, you have seen that movie, have you not? That's like posting a picture of Jack and Rose of the Titanic with the caption, "Happily ever after." The days preceding the launch were a time of mirth and jocularity. Twitter user Snam, for example, took to Twitter to post a totally real screenshot of SteamDB showing 5.2 million concurrent players, a number backed up by David Oshry of indie publisher New Blood, retweeting the post and saying, quote, "I live in New Zealand and this is real. Highguard has taken over. Player count is somehow higher than our population, but the game is so good even the sheep are playing it, bro," end quote. Obviously, that wasn't quite the case, but in some sense, it was actually not too far from the truth. Highguard released earlier this week, and it did kind of take over. Everyone across both Twitch and YouTube wanted to get in on the action. Impressively, the game broke into Twitch's top 10, reaching over 100,000 concurrent viewers. Similarly, it reached nearly 100,000 concurrent players over on just Steam. Those numbers definitely did not last, though. It's dropped to around 18,000 players in as little as 24 hours, and I suspect we'll see that number decline further in the coming weeks, given that Highguard just doesn't have its core loop locked down yet, and it also feels like it's lacking content like heroes and weapons and progression pathways. It's sitting at a mostly negative 35% rating on Steam. And sure, a lot of that is review bombing from people who just wanted to troll the game, but there's also some genuine problems here, like those core gameplay issues I mentioned earlier, and the horrifically bad PC performance to the point where I, on a 5090, cannot get a reliable frame rate above 60 FPS when playing in certain scenarios. So none of this is really going how developer Wildgate had planned, and that goes for the infamous Game Awards reveal too, actually. In a recent interview with GameSpot, the game's director Dusty Welch confirmed that Highguard was actually intended to be a, quote, "quiet shadow drop," end quote, and that this had been planned, quote, "since day one, almost since forming this company. We did it with Apex, and it worked well," end quote. That's according to studio head Chad Greiner. And it was all going according to plan. Nobody knew about this thing. That is until Keighley, God bless him, was invited over for a playtest and was apparently just so genuinely excited about it that he insisted on spotlighting the game at the Game Awards as the final reveal. Quote, "He came into the studio and played the game, I think twice, and he said, 'Guys, can I propose to you? I want to do something that's unique. I want to put it in this spot and kind of do something different and bring this to the world.' And that wasn't our plan, but like, are we going to turn down the exposure? Who would turn that down?" End quote. And yeah, on the one hand, I don't blame them for taking up Jeff's offer. Wildgate Entertainment are a modestly sized studio of around 100 people. 60 of them are former Respawn developers. To be able to get their debut title revealed in this way as the final reveal of the industry's biggest live show, that is such a rare opportunity that I'm sure almost any studio would jump at. On the other hand, it's a reality that the market is pretty hostile to games like this right now, and that a reveal like this would draw a much higher level of scrutiny than this game is currently ready for. Welch had this to say in response to the game's Rocky reception following that reveal. Quote, "Look, it didn't go as we thought, obviously, and I guess part of that's the spot it was put in, and part of that's on us, which we own. Perhaps we made a spot that was more about entertaining and then less about the loop, and that's on us, we own that," end quote. He also commented on the silence following the lead up to launch, saying, quote, "We just kept quiet because we knew the next thing we did should be the game itself, hands on sticks, and you decide for yourself," end quote. And yeah, fair enough, I imagine they didn't want to invite any more flack than they were already getting. With declining player numbers and negative sentiment surrounding the game, the studio were asked in an interview with PC Gamer about what all this means for the future of Highguard, and it seems they remain fairly unshaken. Mohammed Alavi, Highguard's lead designer, previously senior designer on Titanfall and narrative design director on Apex Legends, said, quote, "Honestly, we don't need player counts to be super huge in order to be successful. We're a small team. A 6-player match is not hard to find. What we're really hoping for is a core group of fans that love us. That will allow us to grow. Being the ire of the internet hate machine sucks, but at the same time, I try to just focus on making the best game I can and getting that game into people's hands. At the end of the day, that's all that really matters," end quote. Meanwhile, Welch acknowledged the sentiment towards the hero shooter genre, but he also remains in high spirits, saying, quote, "There's this narrative that it's a crowded space, there's so much fatigue in it. That's true, but if you look at what's actually happening and transpiring, it's that there's more players playing, more engagement, more games, and so we have a great opportunity to find our audience with Highguard," end quote. And look, taking a step back from all of the noise around this game, I really hope these developers can get there because I don't want to see this game fail, but you can't argue that this game is facing some significant headwinds. I'm writing this on a Wednesday night at 9 PM Australian time, roughly a day and a half after Highguard launched, and right now there are 6,482 people playing this game on Steam. It's a newly launched free-to-play shooter, and a day after its launch, it's the 143rd most played game on Steam. Cities Skylines 2 has more concurrent players right now, and that was a game so busted that the publisher took the game off the developer and gave it to a new studio in November of last year. So yeah, it's not looking so good right now, and I think that Jeff's Jurassic Park gif was actually spot on, but not at all in the way that he intended. Speaking of things ending badly, Xbox. Microsoft just did an earnings call, and while Microsoft is making more money than ever before, it's essentially impossible to put a good spin on the Xbox financials, since every key metric is down, 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 like the prices at Coles Australians. That joke was for you. Microsoft's revenue grew 17% year on year, while operating income grew 21%. Microsoft boss man Satya Nadella attributes the growth to AI. Quote, "Microsoft has built an AI business that is larger than some of our biggest franchises," end quote. Yay. So while Microsoft's AI ambitions are taking flight, its gaming ambitions are taking a bit of a nosedive. Overall gaming revenue was down 9% year on year, with content and services being down 5%, the first time that number's seen a decline since Q2 2023. After that time, Microsoft finalized the acquisition of Activision Blizzard King, so the numbers went way up, but now they've seen their first decline, likely due to a soft holiday lineup, and Call of Duty Black Ops 7 low-key tanking, owing to both the quality of the release and the competition from the likes of Battlefield 6 and Arc Raiders. Microsoft CFO Amy Hood says the decline in content and services will likely continue, with projected declines in the mid to single digits against a strong prior year comparable, but she also forecasts that it will be, quote, "partially offset by growth in Game Pass," end quote. And I can actually see that happening with the release of stuff like Fable and Forza Horizon 6 and other first-party offerings driving up demand. So that's pretty bad news for Xbox content and services, but it's nowhere near as bad as the current state of their hardware business. This quarter saw another 32% reduction in hardware sales, making it the 7th consecutive quarter of hardware sales decline, a trend that was kicked off in June 2024 when Microsoft abandoned the antiquated practice of making their games exclusive to their hardware. I wonder if there's any relationship between that strategic shift and these results. Probably not. I am very intelligent. It also wouldn't have helped that Xbox consoles have seen 2 price increases in a single year, largely owing to the impact of Trump's tariffs, but it is notable that Microsoft chose to pass on those costs rather than eat them in pursuit of a larger hardware install base. So zooming out, what do these numbers mean for the current state of Xbox? Honestly, not too much. A dip in content and services on account of COD underperforming is notable, but Xbox has so many studios and so much IP at this point that they certainly aren't overly leveraged into a single game's performance. Game Pass also continues to tick away and will likely see some growth owing to those promising first-party titles on the way this year. On the hardware front, this is more of the same, but I think it's another chance to remind people that despite what Xbox says about their commitment to next-gen hardware, it's not going to be what a lot of people are imagining. They are not going to mass produce an affordable piece of kit that's aiming to take on PlayStation or Nintendo. They're going to make something expensive, and they're going to produce a limited quantity of it, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if they didn't even make it themselves, and they did it in partnership with another company like Asus. This is all speculation, of course, but the complete collapse of Xbox's hardware sales, coupled with their multi-platform pivot, coupled with the push towards cloud gaming and subscription services, coupled with their desire for a higher margin Xbox business unit, none of that screams a competitive, mass-produced, next-gen console retailing for $599 or whatever, but hey, I would love to be proven wrong. A quick lightning round to finish off, and Ubisoft staff have already suffered a number of layoffs this month, but there's little reprieve on the horizon, it seems, as Ubisoft has proposed a voluntary redundancy agreement that could impact up to 200 employees at its Paris office. Speaking to IGN, a Ubisoft spokesperson said, quote, Ubisoft International has initiated discussions regarding a potential rupture conventional collective, end quote, a process in which staff can agree to a, quote, collective voluntary mutual termination agreement that could involve up to 200 positions at its headquarters in France, end quote. They note that this remains a proposal for the time being and that, quote, no decision will be final until a collective agreement is reached with employee representatives and validated by French authorities, end quote. The spokesperson also went on to say, quote, the proposal applies exclusively to Ubisoft International employees under French contracts and has no impact on other French entities or Ubisoft teams worldwide, end quote. Of course, this has resulted in no small amount of pushback from those employees, as according to French outlet Les Echos, a number of French unions representing Ubisoft workers have unanimously voted for a strike in response to these proposed redundancies, set to run from the 10th until the 12th of February this year. On the one hand, I get why these cuts need to happen because Ubisoft is $1 billion in debt and all of their financial indicators are flashing bright red, so the organization obviously has to cut costs. At the same time, Yves Guillemot gets to keep his job, and he's the one that led the company into this mess. When hundreds or potentially thousands of people lose their jobs because of prolonged executive mismanagement, and without management taking any responsibility whatsoever, I think any union is more than justified to take whatever action they can in response. Moving on now, and a UK court has decreed that stealing gold in Runescape actually counts as legitimate criminal theft. This decision reportedly comes after former Jagex developer Andrew Lakeman was charged with accessing 68 player accounts by, quote, hacking and or using credentials of members of the account recovery team, end quote, and stealing approximately 705 billion gold pieces, Runescape's in-game currency. He then sold the currency offline, quote, receiving in return Bitcoin and fiat currency, end quote, with the gold pieces amounting to a real-world trading value of approximately $746,000 US. That is insane. The case's original ruling deemed gold pieces as, quote, more akin to pure information, end quote, since there is an infinite supply to them, but the Court of Appeals disagreed and provided a new judgment on January 14th. Lord Justice Popplewell, which is a RuneScape-ass name if ever I heard one, writes that gold pieces exist as, quote, assets which have ascertainable monetary value and which may be traded for that value both in-game and outside the game. Within the rules of the game, they represent money's worth as the product of purchase of a bond. Outside the game, they are regularly traded for money's worth, end quote. He then conclusively ruled that, quote, gold pieces within the old-school RuneScape game are property which can be the subject of the offense of theft, end quote. Man, what is the statute of limitations on this shit? Because I remember some ninja looting back in my old vanilla WoW days, and I would love to see those assholes clapped in irons. Over 40 US Democrats have signed a letter to FTC Chairman Andrew N. Ferguson urging a review of EA's $55 billion acquisition. The letter rightfully expressed concerns about, quote, the impact of this acquisition on workers, labor market concentration, and the long-term competitiveness of the US video games industry, end quote. It goes on to say, quote, workers in the video games industry are already navigating an environment marked by instability. EA is one of the largest employers of video game workers in the United States, and evidence suggests the company already wields significant wage-setting power, end quote. The letter cites declining worker pay at EA and over 1,700 layoffs at the company since 2023, and that this, quote, signals a labor market where workers already have fewer alternatives and employers can impose deteriorating conditions without consequence, end quote. Addressing the debt adopted by EA to finance the acquisition, the letter also expressed concern that the debt would create, quote, strong incentives for the acquiring firms to pursue further cost-cutting measures, including layoffs, offshoring, restructuring, or studio closures, end quote. It then continued, highlighting the conflict between the purchase of EA and the properties that the buyers already own, saying, quote, the proposed buyers hold extensive ownership stakes across sports leagues, sports betting platforms, talent management, and game development tools. This level of cross-ownership presents risks of self-preferencing and anti-competitive coordination across these sports-related talent, and sports-related video game business lines, end quote. The letter concludes by asking the FTC to, quote, conduct a thorough investigation into the labor market consequences of this proposed acquisition, end quote, stating that, quote, workers deserve a fair competitive marketplace where their skills are valued, end quote. Given this letter was penned by Democrats and pertains to a business transaction that directly benefits the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, I'm sure the Trump-appointed FTC chair will make this matter his highest priority. For Blizzard's 35th anniversary, they've announced a string of showcases to talk about the future of their franchises. World of Warcraft showcase was set to go live on January 29th, so it's probably already happened by the time you're hearing this, so I hope you WoW fans got what you were hoping for. The Overwatch showcase is slated for February 4th at 10 AM PT. Will they announce Overwatch 3? God damn, that would be funny. Hearthstone airs on February 9th at 9:30 AM PT, and Diablo a couple of days later on February 11th at 2 PM PT. Very excited about that one, as someone has actually been quite enjoying 004 lately. The latest season was pretty sick. I love the Paladin. I do feel bad for StarCraft fans. Nothing coming for you guys, it seems, unless that rumor of a StarCraft shooter ends up being true. But hey, StarCraft Ghost still haunts my dreams, so I'd rather not dare to hope ever again. Some quick sales milestones to finish off, and beat-em-up roguelite Absolem has sold 500,000 copies after launching in October of last year. Not too surprising, as this was extremely well received by fans of both genres. Definitely worth checking out if you're into these sorts of games. Tears of the Kingdom's Muso-like spin-off Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment has sold 1 million copies worldwide, according to Koei Tecmo's recent financial report. Not too shabby, heard that one's pretty decent as well. Capcom also released their latest financials, and they're continuing to do very well for themselves. They reported a record number of game sales with over 34.64 million total unit sales. Net sales for the previous 9 months were up 29.8%, and operating profit was up 75% versus last year. Related to this was the news that despite its technical issues, Monster Hunter Wilds has sold an impressive 11 million copies. I wasn't the biggest fan of it, and many others weren't either, but I guess people had to buy it to find out how badly it ran on their PC, so Capcom stays winning. One studio that isn't doing too hot is Payday developer Starbreeze Studios. As reported by game developer, several former Starbreeze employees took to LinkedIn on the 21st of January to announce they'd been laid off as part of a large wave of cuts. The total number of layoffs remains unknown at the time of writing. Note that back in October of last year, Starbreeze laid off 44 full-time employees and contracted workers and cancelled their in-development Dungeons & Dragons project, codenamed Project Baxter, in October of 2025, citing a need to focus on the Payday franchise after Payday 3 underperformed. And when I say underperformed, I mean it shat the bed so badly that Payday 2 currently has 25,000 people playing it on Steam right now, whereas Payday 3 has 300. And no, you did not mishear me. Look it up if you don't believe me. Also struggling is Moonshot Games, the studio behind sci-fi Sea of Thieves like Wildgate. As game developer reports, the studio has made an unspecific number of layoffs. This follows the game's launch onto the Epic Games Store last month, where it was offered as a free giveaway for a week. The studio's statement to game developer reads, quote, in early January 2026, Wildgate launched on the Epic Games Store, where it was well received by new and returning players. Despite the increase in player numbers and overall positive reception, it wasn't enough to sustain the size of our development team. So we made the difficult decision to reduce team roles to ensure we can continue delivering updates to the game while working in a way that supports the studio in the long term. We remain focused on Wildgate's next content update, which introduces more quality of life improvements, including the highly requested progression system, which we anticipate coming later this quarter, end quote. This also follows similar layoffs just a few months ago at Dreamhaven, the game's publisher, founded by former Blizzard Entertainment president and co-founder Mike Morhaime. And yeah, it's a shame to see, since Wildgate was by most accounts a really fantastic game from an experienced and talented development team, one of the most promising PvP offerings in recent years, in fact, allowing for all sorts of fun zero-gravity shenanigans, but it just couldn't gain a foothold in this cutthroat multiplayer market and now struggles to break even 100 players on Steam just a year after launch. So the news that both its developer and publisher have had to downside is sadly unsurprising, many such cases. Alright, moving on now, what got announced or delayed this week? Well, it was Nintendo's week by most account, which started off with a release date announcement for the Switch 2 upgrade for Super Mario Bros. Wonder, also arrives in tandem with the Meet Up in Bellabelle Park expansion, which is focused on adding a bunch of cooperative and competitive multiplayer games that launches March 26th this year, and it seems to be a very strategic move to capitalize on the next announcement they made. The release of the Super Mario Galaxy movie is being moved up in the US to April 1st this year to put it in line with the rest of the world, well, most of it at least. It comes out in Japan on the 24th of April, just ahead of the country's Golden Week holiday period. Nintendo also dropped a new trailer which featured a good look at the universe's two most iconic dinosaurs, Yoshi and that giant T-Rex from Mario Odyssey. Where's my Wario, played by Danny Danny DeVito though? That's what I want to know. This next one was a bit of a surprise. Remember Reigns? This was a strategy game developed by Nerial and published by Devolver Digital that saw you manage a kingdom by swiping left and right to respond to requests like you were flicking through Tinder or something. It was a big hit 10 years ago. It sold like 2 million copies and spawned a bunch of sequels, including one based on Romance of the Three Kingdoms and one based on Game of Thrones. Now it's back in Witcher form. Yes, they've teamed up with CD Projekt Red to build a version of this game where you follow the pursuits of Geralt as told through the perspective of Dandelion the Bard, and weirdly enough, they're saying that the storytelling here is absolutely part of the Witcher canon, which I guess I can kind of see on account of Dandelion just make shit up and you can mostly ignore it anyway. But the series is also known for doing really interesting stuff with narrative design, so if you're at all a Witcher fan, it's probably worth keeping an eye on this one. This releases on February 25th for PC, Mac, iOS, and Android, and if you're particularly curious about this one, over on the website, Maddie actually had an interview with the developer behind this one who talk about what it's like to get the keys to the Witcher universe and how they can basically run wild in Dandelion's mind, creating a kind of fan fiction generator for Witcher sickos. Speaking of which, that's not all we've got up on the site lately. Stu actually went to Capcom HQ in San Francisco and played Resident Evil Requiem for over 2 hours, and you can read his impressions right up on the site. Our man in Japan, Daniel Robson, has a great piece up about the universal language that is Pokemon and its power to unite us no matter where we hail from. And we also just posted our first Ask Us Anything, where the entire team responds to questions like, which genre would you delete? And the entire team answered gacha, including Ed, who actually plays at least one gacha game. All this coverage and more is available over on thisweekinvideogames.com. Sign up for free or become a paid supporter to access tons of extra content, including ad-free episodes of this very new show. That's thisweekinvideogames.com. Check it out. You're going to love it. And now, back to the video. So what came out last week? Well, let's start with Perfect Tides Station to Station, which is that point-and-click adventure game set in the 2000s. This is the one that got nominated for a couple of Independent Games Festival awards this year, where the protagonist absorbs life experiences like a sponge to output into essays and other things, and it's apparently a very true-to-life period piece. Not too many reviews for this one, which makes sense given its niche, but Steam players seem to really love it so far. Only 30 user reviews at the time of writing, but 100% of them are positive. Steam user Jeek put just shy of 20 hours into it and said, quote, "This is probably one of the most beautiful games I've ever played, up there with Firewatch. The music, art, writing, and even the minigames paint a beautiful portrait of a story of life and relationships. The game changed me, let it change you too," end quote. Pretty enthusiastic, but all the reviews kind of sound like this actually. Moving on to Escape from After, which is the very Paper Mario-like RPG about storybook worlds and toppling corporate overlords. This one is slightly more popular on Steam with 220 reviews, which puts it in the very positive bracket with 97% of folks giving it the old thumbs up. Steam user May put in a positive review saying, quote, "I lost track of time and played it from start to finish in a single sitting of 19 hours plus with the Pit of 100 trials equivalent, lacking just a few minor collectibles. It's that good, slightly harder than its inspiration, but very, very fun," end quote. Jesus, 19 hours sitting, my god. Highguard was chronologically the next big release this week, but we've certainly talked a lot about that one. So to recap, mostly negative reviews so far on Steam, with only 35% of the 25,000 reviews being positive and about a 3-star average on the PlayStation Store. Obviously, being free to play, there are a lot of folks getting in on the dunk with less than 30 minutes played, but there are also plenty of legitimate grievances too, particularly PC performance, which is, to use the technical term, complete ass. Moving on to something weirdly a lot less contentious, Winnie's Hole is the roguelite dungeon crawler from Australia that was like, what if you played a virus inside a mutating Winnie the Pooh? It launched into early access on Monday, and things seem to be going well for it so far. Just 40 reviews, but 95% of them are positive. Steam user Creative Feature has about 6 hours in it so far and posted this review, quote, "It's an interesting roguelike deck builder that's not really like anything else I've ever played. The difficulty is brutal, but the game is enjoyable and already pretty fun. Main con right now is it could use some additional run variation, as generally runs are super similar unless you intentionally pick different enemies. The devs are super active and listen very well to suggestions, and they're already planning their next update for March 2026. It's a strong start on an indie game, and I have high hopes," end quote. If one gameplay gag isn't quite enough for you, then how about countless more? Earth Must Die was that point-and-click adventure game from Size 5 Games, who have been making these for a while now and featured a huge cast of notable British comedians, like the Taskmaster guy, not the mean one by the way. It's landed at a strong 76 on OpenCritic, with most reviews holding up the top-notch voice acting and constant stream of British humour as its strongest trait, naturally. Fraser Brown over at PC Gamer landed on a 70 out of 100 for this one, concluding, quote, "Earth Must Die comes from the sketch comedy tradition. Most scenes are self-contained vehicles for gags and puzzles, with plenty of hits but quite a few misses. That certainly isn't a bad thing though. Whenever something lands with a thud, the pace of the game means that you're only a couple of minutes away from an entirely new scenario, with more attempts to smash up your funny bone," end quote. Speaking of pace, Don't Stop Girly Pop is that girly Y2K boomer shooter where constant movement is key, and this one has landed at a fair 72 on OpenCritic. One outlying review at the moment, but all the rest seem in that 7 to 8 out of 10 range. In writing for The Gamer, Stacey Henley gave this one 4 out of 5, saying, quote, "Don't Stop Girly Pop will not be for everyone, but far too many games are seemingly made for everyone these days, and lack a sense of personality and flavor. Don't Stop Girly Pop certainly doesn't lack for that, and is all the better for it. A great shooter with a lot of flair. I wish it followed its own Don't Stop Moving tagline a little more consistently, but it's still a fantastic experience, a glitter-soaked, midnight raving, psychedelic, pink fantastic experience that could be the shake-up the shooter genre needs," end quote. Finishing off with Bandai Namco's Vampire Souls-like sequel Code Vein 2, a fair 74 on OpenCritic with this one, with a few advocates among the publications that reviewed it, but most landing in that 6 to 7 out of 10 range. Michael Hyam over at IGN landed on a 6 for this one, with a pretty disappointed sounding review, saying, quote, "A handful of moments had me thinking, Code Vein 2 might be really good, actually, but nearly every one of them was paired with a reminder that it struggles to maintain the momentum it manages to build up. Souls-like combat demands precision and sharpness from its players, but it also requires those things from the game itself. And unfortunately, Code Vein 2 betrays those fundamentals a few too many times. The story has some bright spots, and the very concept of repairing a broken world by changing its past through time travel drew me in, despite the shortcomings along the path to seeing its full conclusion. The genre has evolved significantly since the original Code Vein, and even after shifting to an open world, it's unfortunate the sequel hasn't quite kept up," end quote. Alrighty, so what's coming out this week? Another relatively quiet period over the next few days as the big publishers mostly gear up for March, but a big week of early access PC-centric titles. We'll kick things off with Half Sword, which I admit I hadn't heard of before this week, but it has a lot of wish lists on Steam, so clearly some of you out there have. This one bills itself as a historically accurate 15th century medieval combat simulator, which, and this is the secret sauce, has a physics-driven combat model. Naturally, this means a lot of hilarious and uncoordinated movements as you struggle to swing an axe, but this kind of thing makes even the most simple maneuvers feel like you're an absolute savant. This one's very likely to be a clip machine on the social feeds, 30th of January for this one. Jumping over to next week now, and one of the first games in February is Star Sand Island, a life simulation developed by an indie team in China, which saw modest success as a Kickstarter. This one takes cues from games like Harvest Moon and Stardew Valley, of course, with the big twist being a career system involving stuff like fishing and farming and animal rearing and crafting. Naturally, no management consulting here, and the anime visuals being a key hook as well. They released a Steam demo late last year, which was very popular. It hit an overwhelmingly positive rating with over 3,000 reviews counted just for the demo. This one's due out on February 1st, a Sunday, on PC, PS5, Xbox Series consoles, and the Switch. 2025 was a big year for Friendslop, and 2026 certainly has the potential to keep the train rolling. The first stop this year is a game called Yap Yap, a co-op horror game where you and some buddies play a group of terrifying wizards trying to raid towers to vandalize them and fight monsters along the way. But the key hook here is that to cast spells, you have to yell phrases into your mic like, "Up dog!" It's a pretty good hook, and voice commands also seem to play into the puzzles as well, so do expect plenty of chaos. This one's out on PC on Tuesday, February 3rd. We'll jump over to Thursday, February 5th now, and another early access title from your favorite AI-first publisher, Krafton. They're releasing a game that was previously known as Project Arc, and it's now being called PUBG Blind Spot, a real-time 5v5 tactical shooter where the action takes place from a top-down perspective, and teams share each other's lines of sight. It's an interesting idea which I feel like has been done a couple of times before in single-player tactical strategy. This is definitely the biggest push for this idea from a publisher, and certainly the biggest brand name slapped on it. PC only for this one. And finally, we're going to round things out with Square Enix, who is launching Dragon Quest VII Reimagined on all platforms on Thursday. This is the company's latest Dragon Quest remake for an entry which came out in the year 2000, but unlike those last three, which adopted the company's now signature HD 2D art style, this one is basically a full-on 3D remake, keeping the kind of retro top-down style of the PlayStation era RPG, but giving it a tilt-shift, toy-like look and feel. This is also not the first time Square Enix is remaking this one. There was a 3DS remake, but this one adds things like dual job classes and a rejig story to supposedly address some of the pacing issues the original was known for. Ed played a preview of this one and he enjoyed it. We'll check out to see what the reviews say next week. Alright, I said this was going to be a big week for PCR's PC games, so put this on your radar. This is a game called Menace, and when I read that it was basically XCOM meets Warhammer, I was like, hell yes, let's go. This is a turn-based tactics game set in a gritty far future involving interplanetary warfare with both troops and vehicles, where you're always on the back foot, every move could cost you dearly, and you need to constantly adapt to changing conditions. The big hook seems to be an emphasis on building possibilities for emergent narrative both within missions and outside of them, with interlocking systems changing your campaign depending on how the war effort is going, and how your squad leaders are faring throughout it all. Apparently they all have individual personalities personalities and backstories too. Really keen to see how that plays out. It's being published by Hooded Horse, the folks who picked up Manor Lords and who are also, weirdly enough, giving Ubisoft a hand in developing and publishing the next Heroes of Might and Magic game. So there's a good chance that Hooded Horse saw something really interesting in this one. It comes out on February 5th on Steam, where there's also a free demo for it right now where you can give it a whirl. If you like the look of it, you can find a link to it over on our Steam curator page, which also has links to all of the other put this on your radar stuff we've recently covered. I'll leave a link to all of that below the like button. Our feel-good story for the week was spotted by PC Gamer, and it's one of the most pointless things I've ever seen the retro scene commit to, which also makes it one of the best. Before Uber Eats and DoorDash, if we wanted to have someone else make our dinner for us, we had to use the telephone to call places to order things, or worse, we actually had to leave our house to pick them up. I know, it was a time of barbarism, but we're through it now, thankfully. People think that this dark era was ended by the food delivery apps, but there was another way you could order food that predated all of that, and it was the Wii Food Channel. Exclusive to Japan, this was an actual thing that existed, and it let you order food on your Wii. There was a whole front end that allowed you to see pictures and prices and opening hours, all wrapped up in the delightful, timeless Wii menu aesthetic. The service saw limited use in Japan and was eventually shut down in 2017, but a homebrew community project by the name of Wii Link dared to dream that this service could not only be brought back to life, but made usable in the good old US of A. The results were tested by YouTube channel Retro Game Addict, where he demonstrated that by utilizing Domino's API, Wii Link were able to fully recreate the online order experience of a Domino's pizza, right down to the ability to build your own pie. Somewhat skeptical, Retro Game Addict finalized his order, unsure if it would simply vanish into the ether, never to be printed off on one of those docket machine things, but sure enough, a short time later, a freshly baked pizza pie rocked up at his door. Retro Game Addict acknowledged that there's like a dozen better, more efficient ways to order a pizza in 2026, but this one was just more fun, and I agree, and if I lived in the States, I might just do this so I could tell the delivery kid, hey kid, you know I ordered this on a Nintendo Wii, and he'd look back at me and be like, what's that? Ladies and gentlemen, that is the show for the week. I'm going to go play some Highguard now, and that is a total lie because I have already uninstalled it. Though I did chat about it at length this week on the FPS podcast, so do look forward to that episode going up over the weekend. Also look forward to a review of Mio Memories in Orbit from Austin. He's finished that one now, and spoiler alert, he says it's absolutely fantastic and well worth your attention, both the game and the review. Over on our site this week in Videogames.com, we always have that daily newsfeed rolling, plus that preview of Resident Evil 9 and the interview with the developers of the next Witcher offshoot, Reigns, so heaps to check out over there. But if you're into video and video only, then be sure to drop this video a like, subscribe, and ding that notification bell since we have a huge amount of content coming in February. A lot of it I can't talk about yet, but it is exciting. Also, don't forget that you can get all Skill Up content over on Spotify if that's your preference. Just search Skill Up and you'll be able to listen to every upload that goes on the YouTube channel, but over there, with the added benefit of that being an ad-free experience if you're a Spotify premium subscriber. Okay, that truly is it for now. We are done. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you again real soon. Bye-bye. This video is brought to you by Eureka Ergonomic, who for years now have delivered modern, stylish furniture to upgrade your home or home office. I'm a huge fan of their stuff because it's functional, well-built, looks great, and it always has some nice flourishes to make it really stand out. There's no better example of that than Eureka's latest offering, the Matthias office chair. If the design looks a little familiar, then that's no accident. It is inspired by the legendary Eames lounge chair, first introduced back in 1956. The design stood the test of time because of its comfort and elegance, and now Eureka Ergonomic bring their expertise to bear by adapting the design to a home office setting. Changes to the overall alignment and backrest make the Matthias a sort of chair that can be used all day long while sitting at a desk, with adjustable height and tilt settings to ensure maximum comfort. Aesthetically, the Matthias retains that classic elegance, and premium build quality and materials ensure that it'll stand the test of time. Made with real top-grain leather and with a sculpted walnut veneer, this is a chair that becomes a statement piece in whatever room it's in. I've long ago sworn off the classic gamer chairs, terrible ergonomics, and I just don't like the look of them anymore, but I absolutely love my Matthias. I think it completes my office, and it's so plush and well designed that I can spend hours in it without ever feeling uncomfortable. If you'd like to grab one, then like I said, now is the perfect time because Eureka Ergonomic is offering 8% off when you use offer code SKILLUP over at eurekaergonomic.com/skillup. That's only for a limited time though, so do get in quick. That's offer code SKILLUP at checkout for 8% off the stunning Matthias office chair. Start 2026 with the setup glow up you deserve, thanks to Eureka Ergonomic. A big thanks to them for sponsoring this video, and thank you for watching it.